So, welcome. How can we prepare ourselves for the changes and challenges that climate change will have on our cities? Welcome to this webinar about the future of European cities. Before we start, I just want to tell you that this webinar is being recorded. So, how and where should we build our infrastructure and our houses? And how can citizens be engaged in the changes needed? So my name is Sissi Billgren Askvall. I work at a non-profit in Sweden called Vetenskap och allmänhet, which is public and science in Swedish. So we are coordinating activities taking place all over Sweden today in the framework of the European Researchers' Night. And you are very welcome to the House of Science in Stockholm, where this webinar takes place. And there are many more activities to celebrate European Researchers' Night, or Forskarfredag, which is actually the Swedish name of it. And this science festival is a collaboration between a lot of Swedish actors, and this very Science Café is a collaboration between European Researchers' Night organizers in different countries. We have Europe Direct in Stockholm and Intercult. We do have the Fundación de Scumbre in Spain, the University of Malta, University of St. Andrews in Scotland, and also Psiquadro, which is based in Italy. So a lot of European partners. And we have gathered 4 researchers from 4 different European countries whose work all are related to future cities. And you will get a chance to discuss and talk with them and to ask any questions you might have. And questions can be put in the chat, and you're free to start asking and giving your comments right away, just using the chat. So let's say hello and welcome the researchers now. So we do have Bernardo das Pinto, Master of Architecture, based at the Lisbon Design Studio in Portugal. Hi. And then we have, hello. We do also have Professor Alkmini Paka, head of the School of Architecture, Aristotelio Panepistemio Thessalonikis.
Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, to make it more simple.
Yes, thank you so much for that comment. We also have Maria Attar, Director of Institute for Climate Change and Sustainable Development at the University of Malta. Hi. And then last but not least, Dr. Lucy Wishart, a lecturer at the School of Management at University of St. Andrews in the UK. Hi. Yes. So let's get started. So this is a science cafe. Have anyone been to a science cafe? Have you been to a science cafe? You researchers?
Not before, no.
No?
No.
No? Okay. So the idea behind the Science Cafe is that participants' questions and points of view is driving the discussion, really. So you participating researchers, you will start by providing us just very brief introductions to the topic, and then we will open the floor to everyone. Any questions and comments can be put anytime in the chat. But we will start with those brief presentations by researchers. So, and we are all gathered now again, thank you for that. So I would like to start with introduce to you Dr. Lucy Wishart. And you're an interdisciplinary researcher based in the School of Management, University of St. Andrews in Scotland. And you're interested in critically exploring sustainable waste governance, especially how concepts of reuse fit within visions of a circular economy. And you've been exploring infrastructure requirements of reuse initiatives and the role of organizations in supporting these systems. So we would like you to give a little more insight in your current research and how it contributes to finding solutions to the problem of waste. Maybe it could even be seen as some kind of valuable resource in the future, or already now. So the floor is all yours, Lucy.
Thank you so much. And I think I should also start with an apology that I have to leave a little bit early because my own infrastructure that supports my own work has slightly failed this week. So I've got some childcare issues that I need to rush away to before the end of the session. So I'm sorry for that.
Yes,
but
no worries.
We can have a good conversation before then. So I'm really interested in the idea of how we govern waste sustainably. And as part of that, I look at how we think about the circular economy. And for those of you who are not familiar with the idea of the circular economy, it's a vision of how we might move to use less resources, to use resources in what's called a closed loop, so where there's less waste, it's not going to landfill. And really, as you said, we're starting to think of as waste as a resource itself. And then within the circular economy, there are different ways that we can look at waste as a resource and different sorts of waste practices. And some are preferable to others. So we're all very familiar with recycling, but actually when we look at the environmental footprint of recycling and the amount of work involved in recycling, it's better than landfill in many cases, but also it also takes a lot of energy, can reduce the quality of the materials that are being used. So within circular economy debates and linked to maybe the circular economy predecessor, the waste hierarchy, which has certainly governed European waste policy for a long time now, reuse is seen as being more important or perhaps more valued. So being able to keep items in the service in which they were intended and to use them again is something that we should be striving to do within society. And of course, that's not new. Of course, we've been reusing items, since the beginning of time, really. And really only it's more recently that we've started to think of ideas of single use for some items that otherwise we would have quite happily used again and again. When we think about reuse from a research perspective, quite often it's seen as an individualised activity. So we focus on the individuals who are either getting rid of their item, they no longer use it, or we focus on the individuals acquiring the item. Those connecting processes, so the things that happen between somebody getting rid of the item and somebody picking up the item, are kind of lost. But Ruth Lane talks about needing to understand those processes as a stewardship of things. So there's actually a lot of work happens between somebody deciding that something is useless and somebody else deciding that something is valuable, particularly when we start thinking about scaling these things up. That obviously happens, as I said, and has happened for a long time, and it continues to happen now within cities, within not just cities, within all spaces really. But very often it's happened in an alternative economy. So it's not happened in the mainstream economy. It's not been in formal spaces, it's been in informal spaces. And as a result, when we've created these visions of the circular economy and when we've talked about them in policy and in research, reuse is quite often missing, or at least an understanding about how these practices might work is missing. And or there's a recognition that the practices are undertaken by people in alternative sectors or alternative communities. And what I'm interested in is thinking about, okay, there are successful initiatives that promote reuse. How can we scale them up? How can we have more initiatives that support reuse? But also, how can we make sure that when we're introducing new policies to address climate challenges and or introducing new policies to circularize our economy, that we're not harming those existing spaces and places where reuse is working very well? So I've been taking an ethnographic approach. My interest, I suppose I should say, is very much about looking at the role of organisations in supporting those practices and in supporting that stewardship of things within different settings. So I take an ethnographic approach to understanding how organisations play a role in these infrastructures, and I've been following how organisations, particularly the one that I've done the most work on is a university, provides infrastructure support to reuse programmes. And you can see that support coming through things like storage. So reuse cycles don't follow perhaps nice temporal guidelines. We reuse at different times, and it's very difficult to have a kind of supply chain that is running in a particular time frame. Transportation is also very important because reuse items come from lots of different places. It's not, again, that differs from a regular supply chain. There's a lot of labour involved in this process as well, and there's a lot of knowledge involved in it. But as I said earlier, these are quite often alternative, or at least happening on the fringes of organisations. So what you might see is that there is storage for reuse, but it's not central to the organisation. It's an outside area, or a kind of on the boundaries, if you like. Similarly with transportation, it's not part of the transportation planning when we're thinking about how we might organise transport within and with organisations. And also when we think about labour, so much of this work is undertaken by volunteers or people who are working within organisations over and above their normal roles within those organisations. So again, it's something happening on the boundaries. And what I'm interested in is having conversations about, well, how can we make it more mainstream? But how, when making it more mainstream and making it more visible, how do we ensure that it remains successful? How do we ensure that the reuse that is happening is continued to be supported?
Right.
So I think that sets a good framing of where I'm coming from when thinking about reuse infrastructure and what I'm interested in. So I'm intrigued to see how the audience have also, because I'm sure all of the audience will have participated in some sort of reuse programme and infrastructure in some way, maybe even providing that infrastructure themselves.
Right. Okay, so thank you so much, Lucy. And I think we lost one of our researchers, but hopefully she will come back very soon. So in the meantime, I would like to move to Malta. And I'm very delighted to introduce Professor Maria Attard, Head of Geography and Director of Institute for Climate Change and Sustainable Development at the University of Malta. And your main areas of research are transport planning and policy, and also sustainable mobility. So would you please also like to tell us a bit about your current research and how you think it will contribute to sustainable cities? Please.
Thank you, Cici. Our main focus, particularly for the research within the Institute, since we cover broadly issues related to climate change and sustainability, has focused primarily on the impacts within island contexts. Of course, being most relevant for us is the contribution to policy at a national level. So for us, the context becomes extremely important. And because Malta is an island state and it's a city state, any research that goes on into sustainability within the context of future cities or future urban areas is very important and very relevant. So for us, issues related to climate change, whether it is sea level rise, extreme weather events, has not a completely different meaning to other cities, but it certainly has some very local and very specific impacts. So we have, if you think back at some of the key research outputs that we've had over the last few years, the Institute has had produced the first vulnerability and risk maps with regards to sea level rise and extreme weather events, particularly in the transportation sector, but not only. So we were the first to identify the road sections within the islands that would be heavily affected, and how much of the road network would be affected in the cases of sea level rise and extreme weather events. Just as a side note, Malta will, or at least in the projections for climate change impacts, is looking at a sea level rise. It would be less than a meter, but still quite considerable when you think we're an island. And then we will have less rain, so changing almost the environment of the island from semi-arid to an arid, potentially desert landscape. And then if we get rain, that rain will fall in flash flooding will produce flash flooding. It will downpour in very short periods of time. And flash flooding is a major concern, of course. It always is wherever it falls. So for us, it is certainly, or at least the increase in frequency of flash flooding has major implications. It has major implications on the main road network, which of course would be the connection around the island, but it also has other connections to particular sectors. If you think of tourism, for example, where extreme weather events have had, to see the closing of the airport, for example. Now, of course, on an island where almost 25% of its GDP is dependent on tourism, that is not particularly good prospect. So we're looking at identifying these gaps where we don't only need research, but we also need evidence to support policy. And so I think most of our research tries to fill in the gap, the evidence gap that is required for politicians and policymakers to be able to make that decision. And of course, if you think of the risks that are related to sustainability and climate change within urban areas and future cities, we know that most of the risks now have started to happen, have started to occur. We've had the driest and longest, and of course the heat waves effects this year for a very long period of time. So the effects on agriculture, the effects on the water levels, the effects on the energy output required to cool down buildings has been one of the most impressive in terms of statistics. So we want to be able to associate when we carry out our research, particularly when it focuses on sustainable mobility, is we want to try and identify ways in which we try to lessen the emissions, because Malta has a very high car population. Believe it or not, it's a very small island, but has a lot of car-dependent groups. So our main contribution to climate change emissions is in actual fact urban transport. And then, of course, try to look at the associations of that high impact of transportation on emissions and the feedback loop that happens to, of course, the cities in terms of air quality, in terms of noise, in terms of general impact on the public health, if you think about it. So there's quite a lot of work that goes on into that aspect. But not only, we also look at mitigation and adaptation with a lot of science and research that's looking now at solutions to try and adapt as much as possible to the climate changes, to changes which our urban environments would have to adapt to, given the changes that we're seeing in the climate, and probably faster than we had thought before. Then, of course, we look at education, and one of the core functions of the Institute has always been outreach for us. So we don't just do research for the sake of research, but we do research to, outreach to the general population. So for us, the way we see the role of science, not only sort of popularizing it for the sake of popularizing science, but to get the information out there to people and to inform and educate is very important. Because of course, if you think of politicians will only listen to public preferences or wishes. Mm-hmm. And so if we can influence those wishes, if we can shift them from, we want more, to we want something better. From we need, more parking, to, we want more cycle lanes. Also in understanding why, of course, we need more infrastructure for walking and cycling, for example, versus need for more infrastructure for cars. And that is something that the islands have always struggled with. So we need to change that mindset. And the way we at least aim to change that mindset is through education and knowledge. So for us, awareness as well as engagement is critical. And I could use this platform technically just to popularize that, not only in the way that popularizing the work that we're doing, but also the reasons why we do it and why it is important.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. So any questions or any comments you might have, you can just put them in the chat. And I think we move over to the next European country, which would be Greece. So I would like to introduce Professor Alkmini Paka. You're based at the School of Architecture at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. And you're also a partner institution of a European-funded project called SOS, so Climate Waterfront, and also heading the School of Architecture's research team. So your own research then focuses on sustainable development of cities, which we are addressing now, so environmental and urban design, and sustainable management of the cultural heritage, of which you have a lot in Greece, I believe. So could you please tell us a little bit more about your current research and how you can contribute then to sustainable cities, please?
Thank you. Well, as you have said, we are involved in this European project. SOS, meaning is the acronym for Sustainable Open Solutions for urban waterfronts that have to face climate change. It's a network of universities across Europe and Turkey, but also involving cities that present the case studies of our research. So cities are being offering sites where our research can take place and take conclusions. So in each city, apart from an academic institution, in this program, we are having non-academic partners that are coming either from the local government or NGOs or organizations that have a relationship to the management of the urban space. And in our particular case in Thessaloniki, we are the School of Architecture at the Aristotle University is part of the largest university campus in Greek. We have all disciplines. So since working on these issues demands an interdisciplinary research, we have the opportunity to collaborate with the School of Geology and specifically the School of Meteorology, the Department of Meteorology, where we can have input from their research on possible scenarios for climate change in the future. So they're producing climatic models that provide us with data that we can use in our research. We collaborate with the School of Biology, where sustainable and ecological landscape management is a crucial issue also in our research. We're dealing with waterfront area because Thessaloniki is a city that develops along a long waterfront with approximately 44 kilometers of continuous seashore. So we have lots of diverse areas with different qualities of public space, of redundant areas, of industrial zones, residential and natural waterfront areas within this long shoreline. So we are collaborating also with the Royal Faculty of Engineering in Scotland, in Stockholm, sorry.
Stockholm, all right.
Yes. And we are partners with the School of Lusofona, where Professor Bernardo Vaspindo comes from, and we have collaborated before in workshops on waterfront projects with students from our schools and from other schools, from a network of European academic institutions. So in Thessaloniki, I'm coming back to our case. Our partner, non-academic partner, is the development agency of the metropolitan area of Thessaloniki. So we have access to the data provided by the local government, and also this is let's say a bridge to get to the communities of the different waterfront areas. Within this project, we have organized workshops where communities, through people that have worked together and have participatory, let's say, communication and design and strategic planning, have provided with data. And so the basic objective of our research is to address the problems of public space, of placemaking, of urban areas within this perspective of climate change, mitigate, control, provide solutions, physical design solutions, because we are responsible for the environmental planning within this project, our school, and collaborate with local economy, local authorities, and this broad network that collaborates within this project from different areas in Europe, exchange knowledge, broaden our interdisciplinary approach, and provide results that we try to disseminate through exhibitions, through our website, and through publications and symposia, where we're trying, as our previous speaker said, popularize whatever knowledge we can get in order to make possible that people will collaborate and be conscious of their actions in this perspective. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much. And I want to get back to all of you talking more about this working together with practitioners and with ordinary citizens. It's interesting and I think important to us all to learn more about how you do that, if you do it, that is. But further, I just heard you did. So thank you so much, Alcmini, and we will move over actually to Portugal and our last researcher. So I would like to introduce you to Professor Bernardo Vaz Pinto, and you're based at the Lisbon Design Studio, looking into how to use technology to solve human problems and how to rethink and make institutions more user-friendly and closer to citizens. So would you like to tell us a bit more about your current work and how it can contribute then to more sustainable cities? Please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, for everything. Then we can talk a little bit of what I heard before, but very briefly. So as an architect and as a teacher, I always like better the name teacher than professor. They have a little difference there, but as an architect and a teacher, I think that I'm interested, and what I like is really the solving of problems in a sense. We need to solve problems. Architects solve or try to solve problems, or at least that's what I think should be one of our main.
So we're losing you. Okay, maybe if you don't use your microphone, but instead use your computer microphone, do you think that would work better?
I don't have one. I'm in my iPad. Can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, we can hear you much better. So just stay as you are and please.
Okay, perfect. I'm not moving now.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that. So basically, I would like, I would say at least 3-4 levels that I think are interesting for our discussion very briefly. One is that we live in a hyper-modern world. It's a term of Lipovetsky and some of sociologists and philosophers, but it's very important for what we're discussing here today because we are highly individualist in our day-to-day actions. We are actually egoists in sometimes, and we also concern more about image than essence. and form than content, okay? I don't want to get into a very philosophical discussion, but this has to do with a lot of issues like Lucy has mentioned and Maria also. So that's the second part, is that we live in a virtualized world, okay? That's my main theme. I'm connecting technologically digital with architecture because I feel like we are the last Mohicans on Earth that still believe that we live in a physical world, but that's not a critic now. What we need to understand is we live in a virtual world. Even if we think that we have friends and touch people, our lives are really based on electronic technology, okay? And I'm not making any point about that yet. Third point, our institutions have a trouble keeping with this pace, very much trouble. I think Lucy mentioned, and I think Maria also, that governments and political boards, they don't have the capacity to change, to suddenly say, hey, we need the airport, it cannot be here. Oh, no, we've been spending 20 years. So that's another point. Finally, the fourth point is very important. I think for the first time in history, we have the full awareness that we live in a sick planet. We never had this before. Of course we had this before, but not in a global and with all this information. So with these 4 points, it becomes that we need to transform our actions in a sense. And I love to teach. I love theory. I read a lot. I like poetry. But for some, and that's why I don't go anywhere. I'm also like to practice. So I'm always in between, I'm never an academic sometimes, and I'm never a practitioner. It's a terrible place to be, huh? It's much better to be just on one side. But anyway, what can we do? I do think that the complexity of the questions cannot be solved by one people here. It has to be interdisciplinary. It has to be communal. I mean, it's impossible to solve by, I'm a very good architect, I've done a lot of work, or I'm a very good theoretician, I've written about it. No, it cannot be. And I guess, all the speakers before me mentioned that very clearly. They all mentioned that we need to work together. So that I think is I'm very sure about that. We need to work with a lot of interdisciplinary knowledge. Another very important action, another very important moment also, which I mentioned, and Cici, you mentioned, is that I do think we need to rethink institutions. And I mean not only institution political, I mean university institutions. Alcmini knows that we've been working together in a lot of projects. We always have to reinvent ourselves. The students are different every year. The questions are different every year. So it's very difficult because we become, fatter, richer, as the metaphor goes, and we want to stay. And that doesn't work anymore. The world is changing very fast. We need much more transparency, which is terrible. Fake news, it's not only Trump and Bolsonaro in Brazil. Fake news is everywhere, from universities, from political parties, from city halls, blah, blah, blah. So, and then we have the question of, and the opportunity of technology, which I'm not, again, I'm you see my hair, I'm not a user, and I'm not the son of the digital revolution. I've studied that, but of course, it's not only good. Of course, we know it's a lot of trouble can come through that, but the question is, I think there's a way to use it. So I think we need to prepare and to take the most advantage of what's possible in terms of infrastructure, technological infrastructure, to try to understand a little bit. And I would say that David Bell, one of the very great guys about the information society, he mentions information, data, and knowledge. I think we need to transform data into knowledge. We all have a lot of data. Not to talk about information anymore. We have a lot of information, but we need to talk about transform data into knowledge so we can try to solve the problems. It's an incredibly huge task. As an architect, I have no answers to that, but I do think that working together in a very effort. I really appreciate hearing a lot of stuff that I believe in, informal, you don't have to be very formal. Of course, the problem that Lucy mentioned is that maybe a lot of the circular economy is still in the informal level and we want to move, okay, but that's not, in architecture, we're on the other side. We are too formal now. The big architects work on a very paradigm of the 19th century, building more. So we need to level that. Also the communal effort. It's very important to involve citizens, involve people. We tend to think that professors, I got a PhD, I have an architect, I have a prize. It doesn't matter because people have very simple wishes and wills that we can only solve by talking to them. And that's very difficult. The system is not worried about it. It's not oriented to that. So basically what I think is, it's a huge task, but I think we have the means to do it as long as we kind of transform this. And this is the moment, because the pandemic was, for me, the first, I'm not nothing talking about, the end of the world, but it's a first sign of we should change something. So I think we should take this specific moment in time. I hope I was not too long. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Bernardo. I hope there's a lot of decision makers listening to us all now, right? So I would like to now invite anyone to come with their comments and their questions, just using the chat. There's one comment already. So I read it out, and then you can say if you want to say something about this. So when it comes to sustainable planning, there's a lot of different opinions and interpretations of information that we have. So how do you think we can distinguish between the good and the bad interpretations as people with limited expertise? People have limited expertise on the subject. So what are your thoughts about that? You're highly skilled yourselves, of course. Please.
I can give a first answer. I think, I don't know if Bernardo wants to answer back first.
Please start.
Or you're going to get to me. Look, good planning and bad planning. We architects, we tend to want to impose our solutions, presenting them in a way that is quite adaptable regarding the brief that we have to address. So what really is sustainable, there is a long range of eventual answers, because the way to manage, for example, space, man-made space, and its interaction with natural surroundings, or the natural system that lies inside the urban space, because there is nature in the man-made environment, intact nature. So what we want here, and when we're trying to address a sustainable planning, there are many factors that we have to evaluate. There are social factors, economic factors, maintenance factors, energy factors, connectivity and well-being of people. I mean, well-being apart from the social well-being, physical well-being, while inside the space, the proposed planned area. So not always, I have to say, we are sincere about all these parameters when an architecture, when our colleagues, let's say, present their work. So, and actually, how sustainable is something is evolving with our knowledge. Things that we considered sustainable a few years ago are not anymore. I can tell you that laymen, common people that come across a public space, let's say, because this is, let's talk about that I'm working with. I feel that they can have a feeling about what's right and wrong, observing physical conditions, maintenance issues that are able to judge, materials, and evaluating the ambience and the social aspect of space, because it's a crucial question of sustainability, the social factor. It's not only the physical condition of human beings, of people inside an urban space. It's also what, let's say, this is the frame for what kind of interactions, of interface between different groups, and how this can be produced to the extent that it can be produced. Of course, it's not the only factor, through design and planning. So it's a tricky question, actually.
Yes, of
and
course.
It doesn't have one single answer.
I'm sure.
It's very complicated, and I'm sure Bernardo wants to add to what I've said.
No,
Yes, but before you do so, Bernardo, since I know that Lucy will be leaving us shortly, Lucy, do you have any comments on this issue as well? Maybe if you open, yes, please.
So fell at the first hurdle. So my knowledge of planning is obviously far less than others on the panel. Although before my life in academia, I did train to be a planning solicitor. And so one of the things about planning that can be, I think, exclusionary, and it picks up on what Bernardo was saying, is a lot of this is about knowledge. And how do we make knowledge accessible? And sometimes it's not that the knowledge that different citizens don't have the contributions to make to planning debates. It's that the language and the forums in which we have these discussions are inaccessible to people, and they feel that they don't have anything to contribute. And that's certainly something that I think that we as universities can do in trying to facilitate those conversations. What can we find in terms of a favourite concept of mine is the idea of boundary objects. And I think digital technology has great potential to be a boundary object. What can we use to create a bridge between different communities of practice to have a conversation about the same vision and the same sense of what we want to get to? And I think planning is a great example of that, because we all have a sense of what we need from where we live. And it comes back to Maria's point about it being very much place-based solutions and thinking about place and context as being really important. And so within universities, I think we can probably do more thinking about how we can facilitate these conversations amongst different groups, so that people do feel that they can share and be involved. And that's part of the process of I think I'm trying to think of the phrase that both, I think everybody used about working together really, and about I wrote it down but I can't find it. I'm sorry, about us engagement and getting people involved. Yeah.
Thank you. Would anyone like to add to this before moving on?
I would just like to make a very brief comment, because I totally agree that it's a very tricky question. I try to use with my students and in my office the change of sustainability to sensible architecture or sensible planning. It's not mine. It's Glenn Murcutt, a great Australian architect that used that word, and I think it helps us to understand that really sustainability is a sensible way of looking at things, okay? Don't waste too much water washing your teeth. It's just basic, but it's sensible. And it's so tricky that the word sometimes lose their meaning and it becomes very, very complicated. As Alchemini mentioned, there's a lot of stuff. We started with geography, lines of water. There's the volcano now in the Spanish, So nature is still here, and hopefully it will stay a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Then there's culture. Then there's genetics. Then there's economy. It's very tough, and the tendency, which is also terrible, is that we say, especially to young generation, there's no solution. Well, there is a solution, is the way to be sensible. I'm not saying that I have it, I'm saying that I like the word better, the sensible word, because it really approaches it. Don't throw the trash on the street, and don't do a house looking south with a huge window in Lisbon, because you're going to be burning out. You're going to be spending millions of years in air conditioning, and the electricity is Chinese in Portugal now. So you don't want to do that. It's sensible not to do that. So I will try to do that. Just a quick comment, which Lucy mentioned, which is very also problematic, is that we're teaching people to be specialists, okay? And we all a little bit specialists in a sense that, I'm going to speak about it. But we need to come out of that cloud and try to listen to the people who have no PhDs, no architectural background. I know this sounds a little bit populistic and sometimes, but it's another difficulty. We need to teach people to learn and to I have children, I have women now, so they're finishing, and they need to do something. I tell my students that they like first, and then you'll see what you're going to do in life. But if you like what you do, you're going to be a good, you're going to be a good support for society in terms of sustainability also. Sorry, I got a little bit lost.
There's another question that we would like to ask to you all also. So what kind of planning is possible in a circular economy with less focus on building new and more focus of using and reusing what we already have? That's a very broad one. So maybe Maria?
Yeah. Well, I think planning needs to change. I think we're still pretty much stuck in sort of the old traditional ways of doing planning. And because governments and public administrations are relatively slow to adopt change, unfortunately, changes that are or have been discussed in academia or by scientists for a very long time have still not taken shape. So the idea of or the need for interdisciplinarity, the idea that civil engineers need to listen more to geographers and planners. I'm a geographer, but I have difficulties getting civil engineers to listen to me, even though, again, I talk about sensible things. I do not talk about, rocket science for most of the time. So I agree with Bernardo. I love it when he said, it's not sustainability, it's sensible. I say I'm not talking rocket science when I talk about these things. But when people ask me what is sustainability, I say, well, think a bit about it. It's not wasting too much things, not buying things you don't need, making sure that whatever you do or you build has some form of life that sort of goes beyond the early consumption years, and that it doesn't end up as a useless thing which eventually you have to throw away. So it is about sensibility, but it's also in the way we tackle planning. And at the moment, the planning infrastructure, I feel, at least in my country, and I know in others, it's still very much driven by demand, So Alchemini said that you have a purpose, you have a brief, and sometimes that brief comes with numbers. We need to build for an additional 1,000 people. Where is it coming from? Where are these additional 1,000 people coming from? What is the basis of them? So in the context of the island, for example, we went through a very, at least pre-pandemic, growth in the number of foreign workers coming to work in Malta. And so there was a boom, but that boom was unsustainable. So what what are we going to do with the additional housing that all of a sudden the construction industry was going to build because of this growth? It was never going to be a long-term wave, because we know that there is volatility in the labor markets, especially in the movement of foreign people. And we know that the sectors that were attracting these foreign markets were not particularly sustainable and very fluid. So I think we need to rethink planning. We need to start addressing different perspectives. And of course, the concept of circular economy, I think, sits perfectly well as a foundation to our thinking, because even the idea of circular economy is a sensible one. Yeah. So that's my perspective, and I think a revision of planning or a rethink about how we do planning and extending it to include, yes, all levels of people and stakeholders is critical.
Okay, so we would want to say thank you so much to Lucy, because I know you need to run. And the others, thank you.
So sorry.
Yes, no problem. Do you have any comments to add to what was just said by Maria?
This is for all of us, or was for Lucy?
No, Lucy already left, so it's for the two of you.
I'm not sure, Alchemy, did you?
Look, I very much agree with what Maria has said, is that popularize and knowledge and trying to build a different conscious, change lifestyles, change the way people see their lives or their position in the world is a very difficult task. And actually, because even us that have some more specialized knowledge, making choices, conscious choices sometimes regarding, let's take the less indispensable thing, like traveling, for example, okay? Or buying things, or disposing things, or addressing the way we want to arrange the condition in which we live. Bernardo has said that air conditioning, it's indispensable if you build a house facing south and with a huge glass window, certainly. But even architects, friends, and people that are have the specialized knowledge can slip and do this quite, let's say, stupid thing. And at the same time, of course, people should try and build on specialized knowledge which will help them address this demanded change in their everyday lives. But I would like to say that this is not an easy task. And if we want to invest more, let's invest to children, to young adults, to people in the secondary education. It's there where we can really, I think, build a different attitude and a different conscience towards the problems we're facing. Because without people's participation, no planning can be sustainable. You cannot impose it, okay? Right. I mean, in order to plan, and of course planning goes in different domains: economic planning, development planning, urban design planning, what kind of planning? I mean, all these are planning involving human lives that you have to try and persuade on go under very critical conditions today that we're talking, to change the way they see their place in the world. I'm just giving you a small, we're trying to control the climate and the temperature to 1.5 degrees till 2030. But Eastern Mediterranean has already reached this thing. And we are very vulnerable under these conditions. Well, the general is 1.1.
Yes.
And we are trying to catch up. Okay, it's a very complicated issue to try and, I mean, it's the whole way of looking at economic, at politics, at social, has to change. And for the first time, as Bernardo said, it's indispensable. We cannot help it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And it's a hard thing to face.
Yes. So just, we are running out of time, and I would like just to ask the three of you a last question, trying to sum up what we've been talking about. So I would like to ask you, what single task, if there is one single task, that you believe that would be very most important, an important step to take in order to make our future cities more sustainable? What would that single task be? Maria?
Is the task that we have to do, or we would suggest?
It could be for society or for yourself or for people in general.
Well, I've come to realize that the actions and the individual actions of people has a huge impact. And I sincerely do not believe that, you know, the discourse that, oh, I'm small, multi-small, its contribution is minuscule and it has no effect. I believe the opposite. I believe that if people really are realizing the urgency, particularly of climate change issues,
okay.
And they start respecting themselves and the environment a bit more, because I think that respecting the environment is, in a form or another, respecting oneself, because we depend so much on the environment to be happy, to be healthy, and so on. But I think that is the one thing that I would suggest anyone to do.
So everyone can do something.
Yes.
So Bernardo, what would be the one single task that is most important? 1 minute.
Very difficult. Yes, very difficult. Yes, I would say from small to big. Think small and act big. Yes, I would say that. Also, move. This is from the younger generation. Move from the digital to the physical. Work on the networks, work on the Facebook, Instagram. That's perfect. But meet people, you know, talk to people, kiss people, you know, hug people. That's important. That's still what defines humanity. I know I don't have any problem about cyborgs and robots, but we're still humans. And third, start in your home. And go to the public space next door. But start in your home. Start in your home. Whatever you do at home, do it outside. If it's good at home, it's good outside.
Thank you. And the last word goes to Alkmini, please.
I would just say that educating the younger generation, because it needs a bulk of resistance to the status quo and business as usual. And my hopes go to the younger generation, and this is really very crucial, because they will be facing the most critical and disastrous situation that actually our generations before have created, and we're not going to be there to experience it. Okay?
Okay. I'm sorry.
This is very pitiful.
Yeah. I'm sorry we need to stop this very interesting conversation now. It's been such a pleasure listening to all of you, and I also want to thank you, everyone who has contributed very actively to this discussion. The Researchers' Night is not over, so there's still activities taking place all over Europe, and if in Sweden you can visit the Forskarfredag program, so forskarfredag.se, to find out about more activities. So thank you so much to our excellent panelists. It was a pleasure speaking to you. Enjoy your Researchers' Night. Bye.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye, Bernardo.
It was a pleasure.
Bye.